All right, looks like we're live. And I'm here with my frequent sidekick, Artistic Layman.
Hello, everyone.
And this is a totally paid live stream. I am a completely bought and paid for whore here. We are going to be, somebody asked me to do a live stream, or sponsored, paid for, a live stream of me talking about the history of Marvel's Thunderbolts comics. And that's what we're going to talk about here. This is a pretty interesting comic book that's going through a lot of different incarnations. But usually is pretty good, and yeah. So we're gonna talk mostly on the early history of it, and then we're gonna touch on the entire history of it up to the present day. So before we talk about the Thunderbolts, we got to talk about a fellow named Onslaught. Now, Onslaught was a villain that first appeared in the X-Men books and then spilled over into basically all the rest of the Marvel books. It was one of Marvel's events back in the 90s. The origin of this villain, just very briefly, is that at some point, Professor X decided he was going to psychically lobotomize Magneto. Kind of a dick move, really. I mean, killing him would be more humane, in my opinion, than raping his mind.
But why would he need to lobotomize him?
Well, because Magneto's a dick, and he wanted Magneto to knock it off.
Right.
So he tries to absorb a lot of Magneto's basically inner demons psychically, and they go ahead and they brew in the back of Professor Xavier's powerful psychic mind, and manages to worm its way into the astral plane where it grows stronger until it eventually is able to consume Professor X, and essentially, it becomes this huge psychic monstrosity that's a combination of Professor X's as well as Magneto's inner demons. It basically reaches the decision it wants to wipe out all life on Earth. It wants to wipe out humans for being dicks and persecuting mutants, and it wants to wipe out mutants for being pussies and allowing it.
Oh man.
So it's a big, huge event. You see it spilling over into basically every Marvel book at the time. Like he takes control of an army of Sentinels and has them attack New York. So even like street level characters like Spider-Man and Punisher and whatnot are seen like battling Sentinels in New York. Well, to stop this villain, the Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom, and most of the Avengers fight alongside the X-Men, and basically not to go over it too much, but the Fantastic Four, most of the Avengers, and Doctor Doom are seemingly killed in the process of destroying this creature.
Ooh.
They're not really killed. They're actually sent to a parallel universe where they would be drawn by Rob Liefeld and written by Jim Lee, which some could argue is a fate worse than death. That would be this Heroes Reborn pocket universe in which they basically would live their lives out again, but slightly differently. It was an excuse for the Wildstorm creators, Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, who were hot shit at the time, to have their take on Avengers and Fantastic Four. So that's happening in this little pocket universe where they have no memory of their previous lives. And in the main universe, well, holy shit. I mean, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four are gone. That's like, you know, lines 1 and 2 of defense for the people of the Marvel Universe, you know?
Yeesh.
Now, there's plenty of heroes remaining. There's a handful of scattered Avengers that still remain. I mean, because, you know, damn near everyone was an Avenger at some point. There's the X-Men, obviously. Daredevil, Spider-Man. The Hulk kind of remains. This is interesting, like, the Hulk in this blast actually got sort of ripped in two, and Bruce Banner got sent into the pocket universe, and the Hulk remained.
Huh.
So the Hulk that remained actually became really more unhinged than even normal.
Oh, great.
Which we'll see in a moment. So onto the scene burst this bright, shiny, photogenic team of heroes called the Thunderbolts. They first appear attacking the unhinged Incredible Hulk, which we'll see here in this. This is their first appearance. Now, at this point, we know nothing about them. They just appear trying to take down the Hulk, don't really succeed because the Hulk breaks. They're battling near some town out in the desert that's near a dam, and the Hulk breaks a dam so that these heroes have to save the people and let the Hulk get away. Then comes Thunderbolts #1. And this is, again, where, the team, it goes out there, it does like a press conference after defeating a group of villains called the Wrecking Crew. And, they just seem to be exactly what's needed, filling the void of the Avengers. If you can bring up the kind of lineup, the character design thing. There's #1. Yeah, that'll do too. That's the first issue of Thunderbolts. So it's a little dark, but you can kind of see the big guy there. He's named Atlas. That guy that sort of looks like a human fighter jet's called Mach 1. That girl in the background you can't really see. She's usually got kind of pink energy wings. She's called Songbird. Citizen V is the Captain America-like guy. Meteorite is the blonde chick there in the center, and Techno is the guy with all the gadgets surrounding him. Well, at the end of this issue, we come to find out that this team of heroes are not actually heroes at all. This team is the former Masters of Evil, basically the main group of villains that torments the Avengers, who have adopted new identities and are now posing as heroes. Baron Zemo, longtime Captain America villain, is pretending to be Citizen V. The Fixer is the guy in Techno. The Beetle was actually a kind of a cool character even before Thunderbolts. Kind of had this sort of, well, I mean, obviously he was a beetle, but it was basically this Iron Man type armor, which fits, basically he upgraded and changed the design to become Mach 1. Songbird used to be a villain named Screaming Mimi, Atlas a villain named Goliath, and Meteorite a villain named Moonstone. She's one of the more interesting characters in this. She's powered by some sort of ancient aliens magic rock or something that she found. But she actually is a trained psychologist and pretty much a complete sociopath. But not an excessively dangerous sociopath. Moonstone is extremely easy to reason with. Moonstone is not necessarily much of a sadist. She's just really, really lacks empathy, and she is insanely manipulative. To the point where she frequently uses her sexuality to get what she wants. But again, she's not all that dangerous or purely evil of a sociopath. For example, I'm reminded of an old Avengers story from the early 90s in which, she is in a supervillain prison at this time, and she's actually got a really, really comfy cell for good behavior. And there is a breakout at this supervillain prison, and she basically helps the Avengers quell the breakout rather than, lose her rather cushy spot. So, I mean, she's a very interesting character. She's definitely by no means a very good person, but she's lawful evil, I guess, if you're going to use the D&D phrase. She's extremely easy to reason with, extremely easy to deal with. If you just understand that she's constantly going to be manipulative as all fuck. So this team of superheroes bursts onto the scene, and they're everything the public seemingly wants. And we see right away some interesting dynamics at play. Now, Zemo's plan here is essentially the idea of posing as heroes. Originally, and we come to find this out in the Thunderbolts first annual, but his plan originally was, I'm just going to gather up some Masters of Evil again and kill the Avengers. And then he's watching the news, and the Avengers died. And he's like, oh, fuck. I wanted to do that.
Oh.
And he was all sad for a while, because he was like, I wanted to kill Captain America. Like that motherfucker. I wanted to kill him, And there's actually a moment where he's just like, what's the point? Like almost forgetting about the world domination thing. He's like, meh.
Yeah, It's like what happens if Joker wins before he has a chance to win.
Yeah. And then literally the character Atlas, his real name escapes me off the top of my head, but Goliath at the time jokes that, hey, with the Avengers gone, maybe we should be heroes. And that kind of sparks his plan in Zemo's mind. So his plan is he's going to use the guise of heroes twofold. He's going to be working to eliminate the competition, as it were, other villains, and B, gain the trust of other heroes and world governments in an attempt to learn vital secrets and go from there. Well, right away, an interesting romance blossoms between Mach 1 and Songbird. Now, Screaming Mimi / Songbird is the quintessential, I don't want to say borderline, but, you know, she's got a lot of trust issues. You know, she's bounced around abusive boyfriends and whatnot. And her last semi-abusive boyfriend actually was killed by the cops as they were robbing a bank. I cannot remember the name of that character off the top of my head, but whatever, doesn't matter. Point is, you know, she's that typical, you know, we've all found such a fragile little thing and thought we were going to save her. We've all made that mistake at some point. Well, a little bit of romance starts to blossom between her and Mach 1. Now, Mach 1 is out training her. Originally, her powers were just the ability to create intense sonic blasts with her vocal cords. But in her new guise, they gave her this harness, which is actually powered by her vocal cord power, using the technology of another villain from long ago called the Claw. And she's able to make energy constructs powered by her sonic abilities. As you can see here, she's using the ability to fly. Well, she's never flown, so Mach 1 is actually teaching her aerial combat. And right here, you see her mentioning, you have to observe not just all around you, but below and above. And then if you can go to the next panel, he grabs hold of her harness and actually shuts it off, and he says, this is dangerous stuff right here. I'd have you completely in my power here. And then she said something like, I don't know, it might be kind of interesting to be in your power. So they're flirting. They end up kissing. And then if you go to the next panel, she kind of has a flashback to her old boyfriend dying and then pushes him away. But over the course of the next few issues, the romance between them does blossom. And it's a very interesting thing. It also, of all, Atlas, Mach 1, Songbird, and to some extent Meteorite / Moonstone are all going to kind of grow fond of their hero roles, which is going to be the real downfall of Zemo. Mach 1 and Atlas both finally feel like they belong, like they have real purpose. Songbird finally feels like she has a family with this group, and Moonstone, literally when she turns on Zemo at the end, she actually says to him, like, you and your stupid rule the world fetish. Who wants to do that much work? You had such a sweet gig as the Thunderbolts, and you had to fuck it in the ass, didn't you, buddy? Now, the plans of this team are exceedingly complicated when at one point they encounter a new hero named Jolt, who we'll bring up here. Again, the character designs in the original Thunderbolts all just really good. Mad props to Mark Bagley for these character designs. That guy is an absolute genius of an artist.
Yeah, the first time I saw these characters, I thought, oh, so this is what Rob Liefeld will look like he was good.
Man, and Mark Bagley's just fantastic. So issue 4 we're at now. Oh, you know what? I should actually backpedal just a touch. Before issue 4, and this takes place between issues 3 and 4, we have Spider-Man Team Up number 7. This was a Spider-Man book that would just each issue be guest starring some other hero or team of heroes. Now, this is, even though it's just a guest appearance for the Thunderbolts, it's kind of important. for a couple of reasons. Number one, the interactions with Spider-Man are part of the reason Mach 1 starts to really rethink things and think, maybe I just should be a hero. Now, there's several reasons for this. Number one, at one point, Mach 1, now Spider-Man had basically saved Mach 1's life and in the course of this battle, and at one point, Mach 1 had a chance to basically screw over Spider-Man, and he turns it down. In other words, the Thunderbolts originally are out hunting down Spider-Man because he's been framed for some crime by the villain of this issue. When they discover the actual villain, Mach 1 just lets Spider-Man go after they've taken care of the real villain. Citizen V is like, what are you doing? We had a chance to take out, one of the biggest remaining superheroes there. What are you doing? And he goes, well, Spider-Man we knew that he wasn't guilty. So if we try to take him down still, if he got away, he'd basically know we weren't what we were pretending to be. And Zemo's like, oh, okay, good thinking, everybody. And really, he just didn't want to screw over. He began to have his conscience pricking about it. The other thing that's important about this issue, and it's just more of a plot device, it's more of a MacGuffin, but they managed to steal some mind control tech from the villain, claiming it was destroyed, but nonetheless, which Zemo will make use of shortly. So after that comes issue 4 of Thunderbolts, where again they encounter Jolt. Now, basically what ends up happening, the short of this is they have a team up with this new superhero. The media shows up almost immediately before they get a chance to even really, catch their breath. And the media's just got microphones in everybody's face. Like, are you going to take in this new superhero? Like, is she your new, basically the media sort of put them in a position there where there really wasn't much of a way to get out of letting her join the team without looking like dicks, essentially. And also, Moonstone / Meteorite kind of whispers that in Zemo's ear, like, we kind of got to at this point. Really, Moonstone just kind of wants to fuck with Zemo a bit, because again, she's just that kind of person. Well, the addition of Jolt into their headquarters means that they have to now keep up the facade of being heroes 24/7. They can no longer, they have to keep up their facade 24/7, which again causes this to this role to grow on a lot of the team members. In fact, the annual 97 actually tells the story of how Zemo originally brought this team together and then decided to be the Thunderbolts. And the reason he's telling that is because Jolt wants to know their origin, right? Mm-hmm. So it was very interesting. He's telling her this really like whitewashed version of themselves that doesn't mention that they were really villains or anything like that. And then as he's narrating it, you see the panels of what actually happened. So Thunderbolts 97 is actually a tremendous read just for that reason alone. Just for hearing Zemo bullshit and spin everything that happened to this girl. So the team, much of the team is really growing in their hero role. At least one of them completely unaware. The one is completely unaware that the team is originally villains. So a little bit of time goes by. There's some interesting stories. The really only crucial part at this point is Techno is kind of killed. Oh, but not really. He's killed, but he was able to, like, this big tech shape-shifting gadget harness that he wears all the time. He actually, as he was killed by some villain, was able to download his consciousness into it, and it assembled into a robot body. So now Techno is essentially an android.
It looks like this?
Yes. So, and initially he's loving it. He's like, oh man, because he's always been a guy that's just, been so attached to technology. This was damn near the next step for this character. as the fixer, he really wasn't even so much of a villain as a guy who just liked making tech for other villains. Like he very rarely directly confronted heroes himself. So, right around issue 10, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four return from their pocket dimension. And I should mention at this point, the Thunderbolts are now living in what was Four Freedoms Plaza, what was the Fantastic Four's headquarters. They actually saved the life of Franklin Richards, and which is Reed Richards and Sue Storm's son. And he actually he was still the legal owner, although he was a child. He still, he had an attorney that would help him, but he basically just gave it to him. He's like, yeah, I think my parents would have liked you, that kind of thing, whatever. So the original heroes return, and all of a sudden the Thunderbolts are having this press conference, and like one reporter asked, like, oh, what about the Fantastic Four? And he's all like, it's their building, they can come back anytime they want. Zemo's really good at putting on a complete facade at Sin City. So in busts a whole shit ton of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, just armed to the hilt with a whole bunch of high-tech anti-supervillain weapons, screaming Citizen V, or Baron Zemo, you're under arrest.
Oh.
And the Thunderbolts then promptly flee. Jolt kind of separates from the group as she's in complete shock, like, oh my God, is this true? What the hell? The Thunderbolts then flee to a space station where Techno used to do some stuff, and from there used this weapon of mind control to take control over from the space station. Use this mind control device to take control over large swaths of different world militaries. So, boom, right? And as they're up there, they're all sitting around and they're like, how did they know? Like, what gives? Like, what happened here? Did a telepath find us out or something? What happened? And then Zemo comes in the room as they're all sitting around and goes, I told him. I tipped him off.
Oh.
And he's like, and they're like, what? And he's like, don't bullshit me. You were all getting way too comfortable. And then just kind of leaves. Techno at this point, by the way, has essentially merged with this space station. Techno basically is this fucking space station at this point. Well, down on Earth, the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are like, well, nerds to this. We're going to go kick these guys' asses. Because at this point, Zemo's got control over, like, large sections of the world. Whole sections of the military have taken control in almost every country, have taken control over large sections of territory in Zemo's name, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is right around issue 12, right around the end of issue 11. The Jolt appears. She had stowed away onto this space station and tries to talk the rest of them into turning on Zemo. She's like, come on, I know you guys are good, come on, right? And then finally, they're like, yeah, whatever, sure, let's kick his ass. And but then Techno is able to basically quell this really quickly, and but then in comes an Avengers Quinjet docking onto the space station, and the Thunderbolts have turned on Zemo are like, oh, you're in trouble now, buddy, and he's like, am I? And opens the door, and he's already hit the mind control device on all these guys.
Oh.
And he's like, yeah, all right. So the Thunderbolts just barely get out of there with their lives, okay? Because they're fighting, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, a considerable lineup of Avengers too. They barely get out of there with their lives. They get out of the Avengers Quinjet. As they do, they get a radio signal from the space station, which at this point looks like Techno's head. And he's just mocking them, and he's like, where are you going to go? Zemo has 47% of the world under his control at this point. You know, I mean, where are you going to go? You know, how much air is in that Quinjet? Have fun, losers. You know. So, Mach 1, Atlas, Moonstone, and Songbird, and Jolt are in there, and they're like, oh, fuck. And then Mach 1's like, well, hang on. Because they had recently, about halfway through the run of these first 12 issues, Zemo was constantly like, saying to the world governments, you got to give me access to the Avengers' private files. You got to give me access to these files, kind of thing, right? And finally he does get it. Well, Mach 1 had read in these files about this. Basically, it was some space station that a supervillain had made that the Avengers, you know, defeated this supervillain. And now this space station is like some months out of the year, it's, you know, got astronauts up there doing scientific studies, but most of the time it's empty. Right now it's empty. So like, okay, we can go to the space station, hold off there for a while. You know? So they get in the space station and Jolt's all like, well, we gotta stop Zemo, right? And they're like, yeah, like how? You know, we barely got out of there with our lives. What do you want us to do? You know? Well, finally, they're like, yeah, we do. We don't know what to do. At that point, Iron Man shows up. He is now in their space station. They assume he's under Zemo's control, but he's really not. His armor was able to block the mind control device. And he just kind of played along with it till he figured out what the hell was going on, you know? So he shows up and he basically begrudgingly helps the Thunderbolts work on a device that'll nullify it, right? Mm-hmm. So he said, here's their plan. They're going to go back to that space station. Iron Man's going to nullify the effect on the Avengers and Fantastic Four, and then just say, holy crap, guys, the Thunderbolts are here. The Thunderbolts will then fight the Avengers and Fantastic Four in a way that will basically fuck up the space station. Meanwhile, Moonstone is going to try and, you know, get to the central command of the, and shut off the mind control device. So that goes on for a little while. Finally, the space station is destroyed. Ooh. And at this point, we see just a blue sphere. And at this point, it's right before the explosion. Mr. Fantastic had managed to seal him in a bubble of himself, with his head obviously in the side that has the air. And Invisible Woman is unconscious, so she can't help him with a force field. And they're just sitting there like, okay, like, you know, and they're like, how long can you hold Reed? He's like, I don't know, a few more minutes. This sucks. You know, like I'm like, it's just this incredible strain on him. Unfortunately, he had sealed Thor and Iron Man in there too, which wasn't that bright because they could have towed him somewhere. Because they can survive in space. Well, the Thunderbolts had managed to get to the Quinjet and basically tow these heroes off to the space station. They save the lives of the Fantastic Four and Avengers. And so they're all kind of standing around there at the end, right? Now, it's unclear what has happened to Zemo, whether he's gotten to an escape pod or not. He had, but it was unclear at this point. Techno's consciousness was then downloaded into the escape pod, so both of them are not done. So they're standing around this other space station, and they're just kind of like, so what now? And, you know, Ben Grimm, the Thing, he's all like, what do you mean, what now? You assholes are going to jail. And they're like, well, we saved your life. Like, yeah, from the problem you caused. And then finally Captain America steps in. He's like, hey, you know, we got a justice system for this, okay? I'm sure, you know, all the mitigating factors will be taken into account. These guys will have fair trials. And they're finally like, you know what, fine. Well, at that point, they're then teleported away, unbeknownst to them, by this alien life form that Zemo had fucked with earlier. So you have a couple of issues then. This is like around issues 13 and 14 of them basically escaping from this. Then they get back to Earth, and this starts this sort of renegade hero phase of the Thunderbolts, where they are essentially attempting to redeem themselves without having to actually turn themselves in. And along this way, they fight. They do take out several villains. Like one of the more memorable battles is they fight a villain called Gravitron, who, basically imagine Magneto's powers only controlling gravity instead of magnetism. So he's quite the powerful motherfucker. During this time, the Avengers had reformed and were doing their thing. And at some point, Hawkeye just sort of splits from the Avengers. He's just sort of like, you know what? I got some other stuff to do, guys. See you, bye. Well, the reason he does that is he wants to try and help the Thunderbolts redeem themselves. Hawkeye himself had originally been a supervillain before redeeming himself and becoming an Avenger. So, he finds out where the Thunderbolts are hiding. He shows up there. He wants to talk. They like, no, fuck you. You're trying to take us in. Finally, he ends up becoming the leader of the Thunderbolts. Now, then we cut to Avengers. This is, volume 3 at this point of the Avengers book, but it's issue 12 where we had the first real, aside from on that space station, confrontation between the Avengers and the Thunderbolts. Eventually, Hawkeye is able to talk to the Avengers into just saying, like, just let me worry about the Thunderbolts. You know what I mean? Like, they're under my, I don't know what you call it, custody at this point. Consider that. So the Avengers are like, all right, we'll see if we can smooth things over with the government to give you a chance here. All right. So after that, and this is quite interesting. Again, all these are great reads. You should definitely check them out. But there was an Avengers Thunderbolts novel, which came out short. It was basically an immediate sequel to that Avengers issue 12, where it's just a team up between the Avengers and Thunderbolts. It's a pretty good novel. At the time, around the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot of Marvel novels produced, interestingly enough, and most of them were pretty good. Now, the vast majority of them were Spider-Man and X-Men, just because they were the hot shit at the time. And also, with those franchises, they could be a bit more vague about when exactly it took place than some other franchises, because most of these are a bit vague exactly when they take place. This one, however, is like dead on. But there were actually this novel, by the way, if you want to check it out, is like dirt cheap on Amazon. Basically, all these late 90s, early 2000s Marvel novels are, and there's some good ones out there, like Spider-Man and Venom Factors, decent read. There was a couple of Iron Man ones that were good. There was an X-Men Spider-Man like 3-book trilogy team-up novel called Time Zeros, where they fought Kang, a time-traveling supervillain. Good stuff. So again, if you want to check out Thunderbolts, this is something not a lot of people have read because not a lot of people knew it existed, and it was a pretty solid read. So the Thunderbolts operate under Hawkeye's leadership for a while, occasionally having team-ups with the Avengers. Moonstone decides to basically become a couple with Hawkeye. Moonstone is she's just incredibly well known to use her sexuality to get what she wants. And so, yeah, she basically becomes a couple with Hawkeye. And again, it's just sort of to try and steer him into, taking the team in directions she wants. She wants to be a hero at this point, but only because it's, a sweet gig. So this goes on for a while. Now, eventually, the original creative team of Kurt Busiek and Mark Bagley, the artist, would leave. Now, Kurt Busiek, he was also writing Avengers at this time. He is a fantastic superhero writer, and he's extremely good at a team dynamic. He is so good at team books. He's done great stuff for Justice League, for Avengers. He's probably the best Avengers writer. He's done great stuff for Justice League, Avengers, Thunderbolts, you name it. Hell, he did the Thunderbolts Justice League crossover from the mid-2000s. I'm sorry, Avengers Justice League crossover from the mid-2000s. So new creative teams would step in, and in all honesty, they were not very good. I actually remember around 02 when I had a trade paperback I was talking up how good the original Thunderbolts was, and a buddy of mine then my roommate bought a trade paperback, with the early issues and thought, this is great. So he then immediately gets the next issue of Thunderbolts, which at this point is up to like issue, 60 something. And it was ass at this point. It had really, really descended poorly. So Marvel decided to give Thunderbolts a shot in the arm in a way that just would not work, but it was an interesting attempt. Now, a little bit of context. About a year prior, Marvel had tried an experiment where they decided to give a shot in the arm to the one book, X-Force, where they essentially decided to completely scrap the X-Force team you know and love. We're not focusing on them anymore. And instead, Mike Allred was the artist, and it was a very adult-themed book about a group of mutant heroes who ran a reality show, which was kind of cutting edge at that point, around 01. And it was a very interesting stuff. That team would then go on to just be called Ecstatic, and there was a lot of good stuff with that group. Well, Marvel decided, you know what? We're going to do something similar to Thunderbolts. We're going to give it a shot in the arm, where we basically just take the title and do completely different shit with it. This only lasted about 5 issues, one story arc. It sold that poorly. It managed to sell worse than the selling ass Thunderbolts before it. There was a brief spike around the first issue of this, and then it actually sold worse. This is generally referred to as the Fight Bolts time, where essentially we would follow a supervillain we had never seen before called the Battler. If you can bring up issue 76, you'll see the first cover of this story arc. Yeah, the Battler. And it was basically, we had never seen him before, but they tell the story of, in the past, he was some loser supervillain who had fought Spider-Man. And this was not that bad, if I'm being honest with you. I don't know why this failed so miserably. I can understand why the, fans who were reading the book beforehand didn't appreciate it, but still, a lot of people shit on it. I don't think it's a particularly bad read. It made, if it had been called something else, I wonder if it would have done better. But the Fight Bolts ran from 76 to issues 81. And that's issues 3 of the original run. But it ran for just that one story arc, and then it was done. Then the book was canceled. This was probably 02, 03, something like that. And early 03, late 02, something like that. Well, the book would remain canceled for a while then. Hawkeye would just go find his way back to the Avengers, and the Thunderbolts kind of remained in what they call comic book limbo, which is that term for when there's characters in the broader Marvel or DC universe that are still around and theoretically active, but no book is focusing on them. So shortly after this came a big shot in the arm to the Avengers as a franchise. Avengers disassembled, then New Avengers, where Brian Bendis took over. And along that time, they decided to take that as a good time to relaunch Thunderbolts as New Thunderbolts. Again, keeping up the sort of renegade heroes trying to redeem themselves, renegade ex-villains. And a few other extra ex-villains, such as Joystick, were brought into the mix, and Speed Demon. And this was a pretty good read for a while. It ran for a couple of... if you can bring up Volume 2. I don't know if you can. I know that picture. There you go. This was a pretty good read. It ran for a while. Oh, Radioactive Man is the green guy. That's another interesting character. So this ran for a little bit. That's Mach 1 in his armor at that point. And yeah, it was basically a really solid read. Mark Grummett was the artist, who has a very similar style to Mark Bagley, while also being very distinct. He used to do the 90s Superboy a lot. That was his first real major gig where he broke out on there. But really good art, really good writing. It was just a quality book. It would go on for a while until the Civil War story would break out in Avengers, which would drastically alter the Marvel Universe as a whole. And that's what Captain America 3 was loosely based off of. So you just brought it up a second ago. Let's bring up the Civil War era Thunderbolts. This team, let's see, Swordsman, I think was the one guy. We got Green Goblin leading it. Venom was in it. Bullseye, Songbird was the only real main Thunderbolt left. And then a character called Penance, which, oh boy. Let's talk about Penance for a second. Penance is the spiky head guy there in the background. Penance used to be a character called Speedball, a bright, shiny superhero who was part of the New Warriors. What kicked off Civil War in the comic book was that the New Warriors were attempting to take down a group of villains, and this went south, and it resulted in a massive explosion which killed thousands of people. And that's when they demanded that the government take more control over superheroes. Can't have these amateurs running around after all. Never mind, the villain would have killed more if the New Warriors had not been there, but whatever. Well, Speedball really, really blamed himself for this, and as a result of the explosion, his powers were somewhat altered where they would only activate if he was in pain. So he basically wore like fucking torture armor to like activate his powers and shit, and it was just a whole lot of grimdark in a bad way. That said, though, yeah, fuck.
Look at that costume.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, spank me, daddy. So the Civil War era Thunderbolts in general, though, were essentially straight up just the Suicide Squad from DC. It was villains that were working for the government and as part of their sentence. And they all had nanites in them that would kill them if they got too out of line, that kind of shit.
Well, that's how you got them to join up.
Except I think Songbird wasn't like she was just put. I don't remember why the fuck she was in that team, to be honest. Like, I don't know why they insisted on putting her in that team. It didn't really fit with the overall theme of it, but whatever. So this runs on for a while. Now, a couple years after Civil War would come a storyline called Secret Invasion, which was just the Skrulls were invading, okay? And there was a big battle at the end of it, and in the big battle, Norman Osborn and his Thunderbolts are there, and they basically are the ones that just kind of through sheer dumb luck end up really kind of doing the final blow against the enemy. I think they kill the Skrull Queen or something like that. At this point, and I forgot to give you a picture of this, but it's not that important. It's a bit of a sidetrack, but at this point, the government's essentially give Norman Osborn control of the Avengers name. And he basically makes his team of villain asshole Thunderbolts the Avengers. Like Venom is basically running around just looking like a black costume Spider-Man. Hawkeye, or Bullseye has basically become Hawkeye. He's running around in a Hawkeye outfit. He managed to get Moonstone into his team again, and he actually has her dressed as Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers. This was the Dark Avengers book, and it ran on for a few issues until Norman Osborn was ousted from power. Dark Avengers is a pretty interesting read, and it very much is in the spirit of Thunderbolts, of heroes acting as villains kind of thing. I do actually recommend a lot of the Dark Reign, it was called, stuff is awful, but Dark Avengers is a solid read. I do recommend checking it out. So, after a while, Norman Osborn's exposed. Finally, the government realized, oh yeah, Osborn's a psychopath. We should not have him in charge of stuff. That's right. He was the Green Goblin. What were we thinking?
Right. Oh, yeah.
What were we thinking here? So the Dark Avengers are taken down. Regular Avengers are once again given their proper status with governments and no longer renegade heroes and shit like that. So at this point, Thunderbolts becomes Luke Cage's Thunderbolts. Luke Cage runs his own Suicide Squad type characters of incarcerated people who, just his own Suicide Squad, essentially. Same thing as Osborn's, only it's being run by a guy who's not a shitbag, right? So you got Moonstone back in there. You got Juggernaut in there. Ghost, who is an Iron Man villain who has tech that allows him to both be invisible and phase through objects. Also not shown in this cover, Crossbones. You may remember him from Captain America 2. And Man-Thing was in there too. Man-Thing is essentially DC or Marvel's version of Swamp Thing, only actually Man-Thing predates Swamp Thing by a couple of months. And interestingly enough, there's two things that separate it. Number one, Man-Thing is like barely sentient. He has almost just animal cunning. He really has lost most of his intelligence. The other thing that separates him, this is his power, is that whatever knows fear burns at the touch of the Man-Thing. You have to remember it was the 70s when he came out. That if you are afraid, you will actually burn touching him. And most people would be afraid of a big giant moss monster coming after him. And the other interesting thing is, Man-Thing's swamp that he is very, very tied to is a nexus of realities. It's one of those points in space-time where the barriers between different realities are much thinner. In other words, it's very, very easy to access parallel universes through Man-Thing's swamp. That's just an interesting side note of him, because I actually remember one time when the Ultimate line was still really new, they introduced an Ultimate Man-Thing in an issue of Ultimate Spider-Man, and my roommate at the time was joking, like, does he hang out with normal Man-Thing? Because he could. So that was Luke Cage's Thunderbolts. Luke Cage's Thunderbolts was a pretty decent run of the book. It didn't really pick up enough to last that long. It eventually ended up kind of just canceled, but it was a decent read. If you see these issues for not too expensive, I suggest picking them up. In fact, just the other day, I saw a bunch of them in a 50-cent bin. I mean, they were kind of beat up, but they were good reading books. So, Thunderbolts is canceled. And remember, it had been volume 2 and then gone back to original numbering. Well, again, Marvel being so bad with multiple number ones, a couple years later, here comes volume 3. This would be the Red Hulk's Thunderbolts. So the Red Hulk, for those of you unfamiliar with it, is basically, it's a different character from the Green Hulk. It's General Thunderbolt Ross, a longtime Hulk antagonist, who got himself turned into his own Hulk. Why and how exactly doesn't even matter that much. It's a Marvel universe. Crazy shit like that happens. Well, at this point, Red Hulk is kind of an Avenger, and he's also decided, you know what? We need a team of heroes out there that'll do the stuff the Avengers, don't do. We need to proactive. Go out and kill some motherfuckers before they're threats. So he forms his own. Oh, go ahead.
What Nintendo don't.
Yeah. Thunderbolts do what Avengers don't. So he forms his own team of heroes, quote unquote. He's got himself, obviously, Elektra, the Punisher. He talked Punisher into being in there. Deadpool, because Deadpool's always. Hang on, we'll get to that in a second. And also Venom. At this point, Venom is not Eddie Brock. It's actually Flash Thompson. They call this the Agent Venom saga. Flash Thompson was in the military, and he had lost his legs in some battle. At this point, the U.S. government has control of the Venom symbiote, and they basically just give it to him and allow him to be like a wetworks agent with the Venom symbiote.
Oh, is that him?
Yeah, Agent Venom, they often call that. So Deadpool joins this team, and this is a little aside I find interesting. In the Deadpool movie, the X-Men wanted Deadpool to join, and Deadpool wanted nothing to do with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the actual inverse of the comics. In the comics, Deadpool is constantly eager and willing to join any super team that will have him. And most of them want nothing to do with him. So that's just an interesting little aside for those of you that enjoyed the Deadpool movie. Usually he's begging the X-Men or the Avengers to take him, and they're like, go away, you weirdo. So this was Ross's Thunderbolts, as it's often called. I like the red and black designs altered on Venom, because usually Venom, even Agent Venom, had the white spider, and of course Punisher usually has the white skull. But I kind of like the red variants when they're part of the Thunderbolts. It was a good little book of just kind of wetworks superhero type action. You know, they go in, they kill motherfuckers that need killing, and you know, try and stay under the radar.
Oh, Hulk with a rocket launcher. That looks scary.
So yeah, that was a pretty decent read. That ran on for a while, but it just didn't, you know, it just eventually kind of ran its course, got canceled. So then we ended up with the latest incarnation of the Thunderbolts. This is sort of, I guess we'll call this Winter Soldier's Thunderbolts. This keeps a lot of the original Thunderbolts in it, actually. Oh, and at this point, by the way, and I don't remember exactly how, but Techno somehow cloned himself a human body, so he's back in a human body.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of the original ones, and it's run by Winter Soldier, who, you know, if you're familiar with the movies, even you'll know him. And at one point, they end up sort of taking in this character that is called Cubic, and it's basically like a cosmic cube, which is this artifact that has reality-altering powers, ended up acquiring sentience somehow, and it became this little kid. So basically, imagine a little girl with like Q from Star Trek powers, and they're trying to, you know, steer her right. That is the most that might be, I'm not sure. That is the most recent version of the Thunderbolts. And again, I'm only touching on the later versions, if nothing else, to show you the massive number of incarnations this book has had, sometimes very unrelated to other versions. And briefly, before we kind of give a overall on this, the current Avengers cartoon, I believe, is called Avengers Ultron Unlimited or something, whatever the hell it's called. I don't know. But there was an episode of it which kind of adapted the original Thunderbolt story, in which this new superhero team shows up and the media loves them, and the Avengers are like, something ain't right about those guys. So it's kind of interesting that, you know, they ended up adapted into, you know, one of the cartoons. That's just sort of a little side note. I don't know anything about this episode other than I did some research and stumbled across it. But yeah, that's just an interesting little footnote. All right. So there you have the history of the Thunderbolts. Now, this is a book that, as I said, has gone through massive changes, massive status quo upheavals. And it's been all over the place. Now, most of them are pretty good. Most issues of most Thunderbolt series are pretty decent reads. Especially if you find it in somewhere cheap, like a dollar bin or something, can't go wrong. And as far as the original stuff, which is by still the best, you can check out the Thunderbolts classic trade paperbacks. I believe they're up to volumes 3 or 4 at this point. The first 2 volumes will be reprinting about the first year of it. The only flaw in it so far is that it reprints Hulk issue 449 after Thunderbolts #1 when it took place before. And that's a minor autismo flaw on my part. It really doesn't even, you could almost argue it doesn't, the order on those 2 issues doesn't even matter. So it's still worth reading. Both of those volumes, and because they're really thick ass volumes, but they're like $35 a piece. But I know if you go on Amazon, you can find them cheaper than that. And I highly recommend checking out the early Thunderbolts. And frankly, it might even be cheaper to find the original issues. But basically, any issue of Thunderbolts is worth checking out, especially if you can, you know, if you find a good dollar bin or something somewhere where the comics are kind of beat up, and there's a lot of them in my area. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Recently, kind of celebrate 20th anniversary, they did an issue with time travel where it sort of was the current Thunderbolts meeting the original or something like that. I didn't really check it out, to be honest. I haven't read much of the current Thunderbolts. I only read the first couple issues, and it wasn't bad. It's just, Marvel has left such a sour taste in my mouth these last couple of years that it's hard to even enjoy the good stuff. You know what I mean? But definitely recommend checking these out. Now, if I had to kind of say like what the overall theme of this is, because a lot of great comic books over the years, they have something of a theme. You know what I mean? You look at like old Spider-Man, the theme was always responsibility. You look at like Fantastic Four, the theme was family. X-Men, obviously the theme is, bigotry and racial politics, that sort of thing. Hell, even something like Avengers, you could almost argue the theme is basically just teamwork. It's that sort of band of brothers mentality you get, with guys working. That sort of mentality you really get in the military,
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue the theme of Thunderbolts, and it shines through in almost every incarnation of it, is redemption. And again, just basically every incarnation of it, this shines through. Even, say the fight bolts kind of thing, you had a supervillain that didn't want to be a supervillain anymore, and just to make money got dragged into this supervillain fight club thing and stuff like that. The original Thunderbolts, obviously, they didn't want to go along with Zemo's plan when time came, and they ended up becoming kind of renegade heroes trying to clear their name. Some of the other versions of it would become somebody is, be it the government, be it Luke Cage, be it Winter Soldier, is leading a bunch of villains saying, hey, actually contribute to the world for once, and maybe we'll lessen your sentence. But time and time again, the theme, even with Ross's kind of wetworks team, it's the, not very good characters. Oh, I should also mention Ghost Rider ended up joining Ross's wetworks team. But, it's not very good characters, but they end up, they're trying to use their darker nature for a better purpose. Time and time again, that's the theme of Thunderbolts. And so, yeah, that's always been the theme of it. And I totally recommend checking out Thunderbolts. Like I said, the trade paperbacks, you can probably find them for cheap. I know the novel's dirt cheap. A lot of these issues are not expensive. Yeah, this is one of the best books Marvel's ever published. As much as it's had its ups and downs, not one book Marvel's ever published hasn't. And when it had its ups, it really had its ups. I apologize, phone going off there. Art by Mark Bagley, art by Tom Grummett. Some of the best artists in the industry, some of the best writers in the industry tackling this book. The original Thunderbolts, the character designs of the original Thunderbolts is just gorgeous. I remember at the time just so desperately wishing they had made action figures of them. Like Citizen V looks awesome. Songbird and Mach 1. I actually don't like some of Mach 1's sleeker later designs. I love his early designs. Even Atlas looks pretty damn cool. One interesting thing, the relationship between Songbird and Mach 1 ended up basically going completely south.
Mm.
And this is actually sort of based how this happened. This is an interesting aside. While Hawkeye was leading the team, he said that the Beetle still had Mach 1, the Beetle, he still had warrants out for murder. And he's like, I can't, the government will not let me keep doing this if you don't turn yourself in. So finally, reluctantly, he does. and then he sort of gets broken out, and I can't remember exactly how it happened, but some sort of bullshit pseudoscience thing was done to him that made him look like a black guy. So they were like, "Oh, this isn't the original Mach 1. Look at it. This is a black dude." Right? And then the government was like, "Oh, so somebody else is Mach 1 now. Okay. Let us know if you see the beetle somewhere." Well, after that happened, Songbird wanted nothing to do with him.
Oh.
Now she kind of claimed, "Oh, you just don't, you're not the man you're not it's not the face I fell in love with." But it was kind of hinting around that she just didn't want to bang a black guy. Which is kind of based from Hawkeye.
So did he ever get turned back, or?
Yeah, he got turned back somehow, but at that point he's like, "Fuck Songbird, she's a bitch," and they never got back together.
Oh.
I don't like how even when they had been heroes for a very long time, like Volume 2 of the Thunderbolts at this point, like there was this one team up with Spider-Man where like, Mach 1 is saying to Spider-Man, like, "Okay, we got to do this, trust me." And then Spider-Man's like, "I don't trust you any further than I could throw you." And he's like, he keeps calling him Beetle instead of Mach 1. And he's like, "Well, in all fairness, Spider-Man, you've thrown me pretty far in the past."
Oh, this is good dialogue. I love this.
It really was great. Over and over again, that book was just absolutely fantastic. Now, yeah, there were really rough patches, but by and large, really good stuff. I highly recommend the early stuff of Volume 1. I highly recommend the early stuff of Volume 2. The Luke Cage stuff is really good. Basically, all the highlights I covered are pretty good. Even the fight bolts, I don't think is that bad, and it's like really, really derided. But I don't know. I never thought it was bad. I mean, yeah, it's not. It's I can see why fans of the original concept wouldn't like it, but I thought it was a decent enough read. So yeah, that is the history of the Thunderbolts, ladies and gentlemen. Good. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that Cosmic Cube chick, the little girl that was like the Cosmic Cube. And I don't remember exactly how, but like that whole Cap is a Nazi stuff. Like somehow she did that or something. Like it wasn't really like that. And she altered reality somehow. I don't know. I wasn't really following it that much, but that's how they copped out of that Cap is a Nazi bullshit and backpedaled on it.
Oh, okay. That's what they did.
Yeah, it was just, the Cosmic Cube girl did it by accident or something. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along.
Yeah, let's pretend that little hiccup never happened.
Yeah, let's just all pretend that never happened.
Trump is president. Let's just pretend Obama didn't exist.
So, yeah, really good stuff. I highly recommend it. Now, this, of course, was a sponsored live stream. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about just this topic for the hour, and that's what we did. So, if you would like to sponsor a live stream, the way this works is you get in touch with me. You have a specific topic you want me to cover. I haven't really come up with a set rate, so that's negotiable. It also depends on the topic and how much research would be involved and, whatever. Say the next one I'll be doing is a review of both versions of Stephen King's It. Now that's, nearly 5 hours worth of movies I have to watch. So, the time involved is also taken into account. But I am very negotiable with it. We can work something out if that's something you'd like to do. Get in touch with me. I'm easy enough to get in touch with. The Beckloff on Skype, the Beckloff on Twitter, the Beckloff on Gab, Beckloff on Facebook. So, get in touch with me. Also, if you enjoy the show, there's the tip jar down below. You can send me some shekels. That's greatly appreciated. And, check out the VidMe page if you haven't already. Good stuff on there. More on the way.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, that's about all we got for tonight. Luke, thanks for being on here with me.
Always fun to be here.
Beckloff out.